You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 42.
The gun barrel was burning hot, but Flattop held on tight, even as the flesh on his hand sizzled like a barbecue steak. Mohawk glanced at Maine, saw that he was okay, and breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Flattop yanked the barrel towards himself, causing Mohawk, who was still holding the gun, to be pulled closer. He immediately let go, but before he could lean back, Flattop viciously kicked one foot at his head. The blow caught Mohawk on the chin and slammed his head back. Momentarily dazed, he slumped forward, blood streaming from a cut on his lip. Flattop dropped the gun, grabbed a handful of Mohawk's silver hair and dragged him closer. "You shouldn't have come," he hissed. "What made you think you could stop me?" Mohawk raised his eyes and braced himself against the side of the truck to stop Flattop pulling him any closer. "What makes you think we came alone?" he gasped. Just then, there was a terrible screeching noise from the top of the truck, like the most severe case of fingernails being scratched down a blackboard. Flattop looked up and saw the truck's steel roof being sliced open, then peeled back like the lid on a sardine can. "What the?" he growled. Zaw, perched on top of the truck, leaned in and sank his razor-sharp teeth into Flattop's wrist. Flattop howled in pain, glared at the yeti, then let go of Mohawk's hair. Mohawk glanced ahead and saw the blazing plane wreck looming up fast. In seconds, the truck would collide with it, spelling certain death for everybody in the truck. Taking a firm grip on Abby's toga, Mohawk lifted her off the seat and into Zaw's waiting hands. Zaw hoisted her through the hole in the roof and sprang high into the air. His incredible jump carried he and his sister 10 meters away, where he landed safely in the dark. In the same moment, Mohawk wrapped one huge arm around Isabelle, pulled her close, and jumped clear of the speeding truck. His boots hit the ground, slid through a blood pool, and skidded to a halt. Looking down at the small girl in his arms, he saw that she was alive and appeared to be unharmed. He pulled the rag out of her mouth. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she replied weakly. "I'm here to save you," Mohawk explained. Isabelle smiled. "I figured that much when Flattop tried to kill you," she replied. "Are Laheeti and Twig here as well?" Before Mohawk could reply, the teenagers appeared breathlessly at the giant GX's side. Twig used the pocket knife he had found earlier to cut the bonds off Isabelle's wrists and ankles. She hugged both boys tightly, and also Pemba, who was feeling a bit left out of the impromptu reunion. Isabelle looked around in the dark. "Where's Abby?" she asked, worried. "Zaw's got her," said Mohawk. She relaxed a little, then looked from face to face. "You came for us," she said, her voice suddenly emotional. "We thought you'd try, but Abby wasn't sure how you'd be able to get here from Shangri-La in time." "Neither were we," said Twig. "So how did you?" Isabelle asked. Twig wondered where to begin and then merely said, "It's a long story, and an interesting one," stuttered Gull, "but there will be time for that later." Just then, Zaw appeared from the darkness with Abby at his side. In whispered tones, she thanked them all for coming to save her and Isabelle. Pemba noticed Zaw's right hand. "You're bleeding, are you okay?" he exclaimed. Zaw briefly examined his injured index finger. There was blood running down his hand and under the sleeve of his toga. "I tore out a claw cutting through the roof of the truck," he explained, then shrugged. "I've never tried to do that before. I guess that's the limit of what a claw can cut." Abby looked at her brother for a long moment. It hadn't even occurred to her that he might have been injured freeing her from the truck. She'd been so worried about herself and Isabelle that she hadn't given any thought to whether he was okay. Now that she thought about it, cutting through the truck's steel roof using only his claws was a hell of a thing to do. Precisely the kind of stunt that he would usually brag about for weeks to come, especially if he'd been injured doing it. Something that put him squarely in the limelight so he could talk himself up to everybody in earshot. It was part of his charm that, as he got older, would be described by some as charisma. Abby had always thought that he was a natural leader. Apart from the fact that he was impetuous, argumentative, immature, and a total pain in the ass. He was completely incapable of being responsible for himself, so how could he ever be responsible for anything or anybody else in his life? That was what was so weird about his silence right now. Abby was sure that if Pemba hadn't noticed Zaw's injured hand, Zaw wouldn't have even mentioned it. It was like he was actually putting other people before himself for the first time in his life. As Abby watched her brother tear off a piece of his toga and wrap it around his injured hand, she wondered if she was seeing the first glimpses of a responsible adult under her brother's usually brash exterior. Maybe this was what it was like when boys like Zaw started to grow up. "You did good, dude," said Pemba, slapping Zaw on the back. "But we're not out of trouble yet. There are probably still some North Korean soldiers lurking around this airport." Then let's get out of here, Isabelle replied. Zaw glanced in the direction of the truck, which was, at that moment, skirting dangerously close to the flaming aircraft wreck on the tarmac. What about Maine? Should we wait for him? He asked. Mohawk shook his head and replied, no. He and Flat Top have got some stuff to sort out, and it might take a while. Speaking into his button mic, Zaw reported to Shawkat and the other Yetis that Abby and Isabelle had been found alive and well. The Yeti team leader congratulated them, then ordered everybody to return to the site where the claws were concealed for an immediate departure. After a brief discussion, Zaw convinced them that the quickest way back to the claws was to retrace the path that he, Sierra, and Hassan had taken to get into the airport. That meant going back up to the first floor and out of the window of the VIP lounge. With no further discussion, the group set off across the ground floor, heading towards the escalator that led up to the first floor. When they arrived at the escalator, they found the soldiers lying on the bottom step, sound asleep. Mohawk relieved one of them of a holstered pistol, just in case they bumped into more trouble on the way out. A moment later, he heard a shuffle behind him and spun around in alarm, pointing the pistol at the assailant. Hassan paused mid-step and held up his hands in mock submission. "Don't shoot," he muttered. "I'm on your side." Mohawk relaxed and lowered the gun. "We're going out the way you came in," he explained. Hassan nodded, then acknowledged Abby and Isabelle with an affectionate hand on their slim shoulders. They thanked him for coming to the airport to save them, but before they could say more, he silenced them with a friendly gesture and indicated they should hurry on up the escalator. The girls did so, with Mohawk first and the two Yetis coming up last. "Where's Sierra?" Zaw asked. "Not sure," Hassan replied. "We got separated when the truck came through, and now I can't get him on the radio. He might have dropped it when we dived for cover. He's probably upstairs already, waiting for us at the window." Zaw nodded and didn't give it too much thought. What Hassan said made sense. Even if Sierra lost his radio and didn't hear Shawkat's order, he would have seen the girls get rescued, so he'd know the mission was over and it was time to leave. The teenage Yeti hurried up the steps, fully expecting to find Sierra waiting for them in the VIP lounge. In the last seconds before the truck smashed into the inferno on the tarmac, Maine managed to free himself from Flat Top's strangulating grip and deliver several stunning punches to the angry GX's head. One would have been enough to crack the skull of any normal human, but after 3, Flat Top was still awake and swearing violently. The plane was coming up fast. Maine landed another powerful punch on Flat Top's nose. "Go down, you tough mother, go down." One more, and suddenly Flat Top's eyes rolled into the back of his head. Then Maine reached through the hole in the windscreen, grabbed the steering wheel and turned it hard to one side. There was hardly a moment to spare. The truck lurched to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision with the inferno, but not far enough to escape the fingers of flame licking the air around the plane. Maine felt the heat suddenly build and braced himself for a fiery demise. As the truck passed within an arm's length of the plane wreck, the searing flames enveloped the bonnet and sucked the breath out of Maine's lungs. The clothes on his body began to burn his skin, and his long silver hair was instantly permed in a way that would last for several years. Just as the soles of his boots began to melt like bubblegum on a summer's day, the truck shot through the fire and smoke and emerged into cool, clear air on the other side. Maine opened his eyes, glanced down quickly at his body to see if he was on fire, and saw that his only injury was the blackened ends of his newly extra curly silver hair. Despite its owner being knocked semi-conscious for a few seconds, Flat Top's leaden foot continued to doggedly press the accelerator to the floor. This caused the truck to roar into an ever-tightening turn, and then without warning, the wheels on the right-hand side lifted off the ground. Maine had less than a second to react. Letting go of the steering wheel, he jumped clear of the bonnet as the truck flipped onto its left side. Landing safely on his feet, he watched as the truck skidded along the tarmac in a blaze of orange sparks, then came to rest about 40 meters away from the crackling inferno. Maine approached the truck warily. Through the hole that Zaw had cut in the roof, he could see Flat Top shaking his head and regaining his senses. Then one huge hand emerged from the driver's side window, followed by another, and Flat Top hauled his massive body onto the surface of the door. He stood up to his full height and beat his chest, roaring in anger like King Kong perched on the top of the Empire State Building. Framed against the orange flames of the burning plane behind him, he was an awesome sight. Maine crossed his arms and waited. He would not run from or run to this confrontation, because he knew, as he had always known, that it would come to him. Since arriving in Nepal, the growing divide between he and Flat Top had led them both inexorably to this point in time. Why they had taken such different philosophical paths he could not explain. Flattop felt no humanity, whereas Maine had embraced his own. Perhaps they were not identical clones after all. Perhaps Flattop was more gorilla than human and Maine more human than gorilla. Whatever the reason, fate had brought them both to this moment and would decide the outcome. Maine felt no emotion now, not even sadness. It had to be done. In many ways, he felt like just a spectator in what was about to happen. Flattop jumped down to the ground. One eye was bruised and beginning to swell. He fixed his enraged gaze on his brother and moved away from the truck in slow, deliberate steps. Like a lion circling its prey. "So you came with the yetis," he growled. The answer was obvious. "Yes," Maine said in a matter-of-fact voice. "How many?" Flattop asked. Maine's poker face gave nothing away. "Enough," he said. Flattop snorted and replied, "Coward, you knew you couldn't stop me on your own." Maine shrugged. "Maybe," he said. Flattop glanced around dramatically. "Well, they're not here now to save you," he growled. "You're the one who needs to be saved, Flattop," Maine retorted. "In more ways than you know." "Garbage, I don't want to hear any more of your preaching," Flattop spat. He pointed an accusing finger. "You ruined everything, and now you're gonna pay for that." Maine spread his hands. "I'm right here," he grunted. Flattop opened and closed his hands in anticipation of wrapping them around his brother's neck. But before the punishment would come the lecture. He began to pace back and forth, gesticulating angrily. "All I wanted was to finish the mission and go back to North Korea. Was that too much to ask?" he seethed. "No," Maine said. Flattop paused and eyeballed Maine. "Then why is my plane on fire and my truck lying on its side?" he howled. "You know why," Maine said. "Abby and Isabelle, you dragged them into this." Flattop's expression darkened. "You goddamn goody two-shoes," he scoffed. "What do you care? They're just two loudmouthed teenage girls in a world filled with loudmouthed teenage girls. It's not like they're in short supply. Two more, two less. What difference does it make?" Maine was icy calm. "It makes a difference to me," he stated. Flattop, exasperated, asked, "But why? You're not their mother. You're a trained soldier, a trained killer. That's what you do." "That's what you are." "No, I've left all that behind," Maine said. Flattop shook his head furiously. "You're wrong," he roared. "You're the same as me and you always will be. You're the property of the North Korean military, whether you like it or not. Every bone in your body belongs to them." "Nobody owns me," yelled Maine, "except me." Flattop laughed and said, "That's exactly the kind of attitude I expect from a soldier who turned soft and became a summit-gazing, yeti-loving hippie." "I didn't turn soft, Flattop," Maine replied. "I realize that everything we've been told by our masters is a pack of lies." "Lies? You want to talk about lies?" Flattop smiled patronizingly. "You think those yetis who came with you to the airport are your friends? You think any of them back in Shangri-La are your friends? They lied to you to get you to cooperate. Now that they've got their precious little girls back, they'll dump you like a bad habit." Flattop watched Maine carefully and saw that his barbed comments had hit home. "There's no way the yetis are gonna let you go back to Shangri-La," Flattop continued. "You're a soldier from an enemy regime. You may have convinced yourself that you've changed, but they know who you are. They're never gonna let you back in. So you're officially homeless, brother. Congratulations. As of tonight, you've got no place to go." Maine stood in glum silence, knowing that Flattop's accusations were true. Flattop stopped pacing and curled his fingers into tight fists. His face was a mask of rage, his body rigid with anger. "You messed up your life, and now you've messed up mine," he raged. "I'm glad you like this place so much, because the last thing I'm gonna do before I go back to North Korea is pound you into the ground so you become part of it forever." Flattop stepped back to the truck that was lying on its side and quickly examined the large piece of steel hanging off the roof. It was the portion of the roof that Zaw partially peeled back during the struggle in the airport building. Measuring about 1 meter by 2 meters, it dangled free except for about 30 centimeters, which was still attached. Flattop scraped his thumb along one of the edges, razor sharp, perfect for decapitating enemy soldiers, or twin brothers who just never learn. Looking closer, he saw an object jammed in the steel, shaped like a combination of a shark's tooth and a sickle. It was a yeti claw. He ripped the piece of steel off, then bent it in half so he could hold one side without cutting his hands. Now it was like a large square frisbee with meter-long blades on 3 sides. He plucked out the yeti claw and flicked it in Maine's direction. "Something to remember your friends by," Flattop chuckled. Then his smile evaporated and he moved forward, swinging the lethal frisbee back and forth, getting a feel for its weight and balance. Maine readied himself, knowing that the next few minutes might be his last. The North Korean Squad 2 leader lay very still, concealed behind a row of seats on which 2 cadavers were sitting slumped together, a man and a woman. one dead by a shot to the middle of the chest and the other by a shot to the neck. The latter was probably the injury that led to a more painful and lingering death. The blood flowing from the bodies had pooled on one orange seat and was slowly dripping off the edge of the plastic surface, directly onto the squad leader's head and also the head of the soldier lying quietly beside him. When the soldier began to shuffle aside, the squad leader clamped a hand on his arm and gave him the evil eye. No words were said, but the message was loud and clear. The soldier remained motionless while the squad leader calmly resumed watching the movements of the motley group at the escalator. Through his night vision goggles, he saw the tableau in varying shades of fluorescent green. The smaller individuals in the group were clearly teenagers of different nationalities. He wasn't sure which, but it didn't matter because, importantly, they appeared to be human. So did the two giants with the shiny hair, whom the squad leader recognized as being the traitorous North Korean commandos GX-1 and 2, blacklisted by the regime and now permanently positioned on the top of the Grand Marshal's most wanted list. It was the two larger creatures wearing the long, loose coats with sleeves and hoods that captured his attention. Their faces were mostly hidden, but on a couple of occasions he had gotten a glimpse of their features. And they were definitely not human. Precisely what they were, he had no idea, but in the green luminous light of his goggles, they looked more like big cats with patterned faces and sharp teeth. Yetis, that was what the commander had said they had come to Tribuvan to find. The Commando GX-3 was supposed to deliver one, bound hand and foot, to the waiting assault team who would refuel the plane and be back in the sky in under 10 minutes. It was supposed to be a piece of cake, but somewhere along the way it all went badly awry. The assault team in the terminal had been decimated by unseen adversaries, the plane on the tarmac had been reduced to a flaming wreck, and to top it all off, GX-3 had demonstrated himself to be completely incapable of delivering a biological specimen in a combat situation. He should never have been entrusted with such an important mission. As far as the squad leader could tell, the so-called commando was so incompetent that he wouldn't even be able to successfully deliver a pizza in a one-street town. Now was not the time to ponder where it had all gone wrong. There would be time enough for that later, and the squad leader knew that heads would roll. Assuming, of course, at least one member of the assault team made it back home to report the outcome of the mission. Up till a few moments ago, things were looking pretty grim, but then the squad leader had seen something that made him think that he could steal victory from the jaws of defeat. And all he needed to do was lay very still and wait for his chance. He watched the two creatures exchange a few words at the base of the escalator, then bound up 3 steps at a time after the humans. After waiting a minute or so to be certain that they weren't coming back down, in whispered tones, he ordered the soldier to follow him across the ground floor. Moving as quietly as they could, they weaved their way around the unmoving bodies, then stopped at a particularly large one that was lying face down on the floor. The squad leader had seen it go down at the same time the truck had plowed through the building. Exactly what had happened to it, the squad leader wasn't sure, but he suspected it had been hit by a stray bullet. A common event in combat situations, military training got the mission done but wasn't worth a damn when it came to keeping you alive on the battlefield. What you needed most for that was good luck and karma that was fully paid up. The creature was dressed in a long black coat, just like the two creatures that the squad leader had watched bound up the escalator moments ago. Its features were concealed by the hood, and lying there amongst the other bodies, it could almost pass for human, except for the 2 large furry feet, complete with multiple hooked claws protruding from the bottom of its coat. The soldier slid the night vision goggles off his face and leaned closer to the unmoving body. "Holy crap," he hissed. "Is that what I think it is?" "We'll find out later," the squad leader replied. He was mentally measuring the size of the creature and trying to work out the best way to get it from there to the plane. Dragging it would be faster, but carrying it would be quieter. "Is it dead?" asked the soldier. Good point, thought the squad leader. It would sure spoil their night if they picked the thing up and it started spitting and hissing in their arms. He kicked it several times in the ribs using his steel-capped boots and jumped back to see what happened. No response, it seemed pretty dead. "Roll its head to the side and check," he ordered. The soldier hesitated and the squad leader glared at him. Fearfully, the soldier crouched down, slipped the muzzle of his machine gun under the edge of the ripped hood and lifted the hood aside. The exit wound in the side of Sierra's skull was clearly visible. The soldier stood up. "It's not getting up from that," he muttered. The squad leader agreed. Sure, now that they had a yeti, he decided speed was of the essence. When its companions realized that it wasn't with them, they would be back to find out what happened. He needed to get this creature out of the airport and onto the plane as fast as possible. "We'll take 1 foot each," he ordered. Switching his snub-nosed machine gun to one hand, he bent down and grabbed one of the yeti's furry white ankles, taking particular care not to hook his arm on the claws. The soldier did the same, and then they double-timed it across the floor, dragging Sierra's prostrate body behind them with his dead arms reaching out as if he was desperately trying to grip the ground and stop himself being taken away by the hounds from hell.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.